Once upon a time, in a distant land, there lived a very kind and simple old woman. She had two sons. The elder son's name was Badlu, who had gone to a foreign land for business, while the younger son, Faisal, lived with her and took care of her. By fate's will, one day, Faisal fell ill. Despite all treatments, he passed away, leaving the old woman devastated. She had no one to care for her anymore. In her grief, she wrote a letter to her son Badlu, informing him of her condition and Faisal's death. Before she could receive a reply, one day, a traveler arrived at her house, and he said, "Grandmother, I have come from a very distant place. I am utterly exhausted, and night is about to fall. If you permit, may I stay at your house for the night?" The old woman replied, "Come in, my child. What harm is there? It's just for a night. It's not like you'll take my house away. But tell me, where have you come from?" The traveler responded, "I have come from another world." Casually, the traveler was referring to a long journey, but the simple-minded old woman, still grieving her son's death, took his words literally. She looked at him intently because, in her sorrow, she often told herself that her son had now gone to another world. Hearing the phrase, "another world," from the traveler, immediately reminded her of her deceased son. With a deep sigh, she asked, "Son, are you really coming from another world? My son Fazal passed away just last month. Have you ever met him?" Realizing the old woman's simplicity, the cunning traveler saw an opportunity and replied, "Oh, Fazal, your son? Yes, grandmother. I know him very well. He and I lived in the same small room. He is a very good boy." Hearing this, the old woman moved closer to the traveler and with longing eyes asked, "How is my Fazal? What does he do there?" The traveler sighed and said, "Not very well. He hasn't found a proper job yet. The poor boy herds goats to make a living." Hearing this, the old woman was heartbroken. "Oh no, my poor son is herding goats? He must be wandering in pastures, struggling there too," she lamented. To deepen her sorrow, the traveler continued, "Yes, grandmother, the poor boy roams around, disheveled, with torn clothes." The old woman's eyes welled up with tears. She asked, "Son, when will you return?" The traveler replied, "Mother, I have to go back the day after tomorrow." The old woman then said, "Then do me a favor. I have a roll of cloth 40 yards long. Take it and some money for my Fazal. Here, take 50 coins too." The traveler spent the night comfortably at the old woman's house, and by morning he disappeared with her money and belongings. A few days later, Badlu, the elder son, returned from his travels. As soon as he arrived, he embraced his mother, and they both wept over Fazal's sudden death. While talking, his mother told him, "Son, when you weren't here, a man from the other world stayed at our house for a night. He told me everything about your brother Faisal. They lived together in the same room in the other world. He said Fazal is still herding goats and that his clothes are torn. So I sent a roll of cloth and 50 coins for him." Hearing this, Badlu was shocked. Having traveled extensively, he was no longer naive. He immediately understood the deception and said, "Mother, you are too innocent. No one ever returns from the other world. You don't understand the tricks of the world." Badlu grew increasingly angry, both at his mother's simplicity and the traveler's cunning. He considered his mother foolish for believing such a story. After thinking for a moment, he said, "All right, mother, you stay at home. I have some work to do." He then resolved in his heart, "I will keep walking straight ahead until I find someone even more gullible than my mother, and until I recover the losses, I won't return home." With this thought, he set out on his journey, making plans along the way. In the distance, he saw a village and headed straight toward it. Outside the village, he saw a wealthy landowner's mansion. Nearby, a well-fed goat was tied, with 3 beautiful kids sitting beside her. Badloo knelt on the ground and began bowing repeatedly to the goat. From a window, the landowner's wife observed this strange behavior. She called her maid and said, "Go outside and see why that man is bowing to our goat like this." The maid went out and asked, "Hey, good man, what is this goat to you that you are bowing to it so much?" Badloo replied, "Madam, I have been searching for this very goat. What you see as just a goat is actually a relative of my wife. Tomorrow is my son's wedding, and we have invited all our relatives, but this one was missing. I have come to invite her to the wedding." Hearing this, the maid ran back and told her mistress. The mistress and her servants laughed hysterically, thinking, "What a fool! He believes a goat is his wife's relative and is inviting it to his son's wedding." Thinking it would be amusing to make a bigger fool out of him, the mistress agreed and said, "If she is your wife's relative, she must attend the wedding. But she might have trouble finding your home, so it's better if you take her along with you." The landowner's wife then ordered her servants, "Dress up our guest properly. It's winter, so give her my finest woolen shawl." The goat and her kids were lavishly decorated and seated in a grand carriage pulled by 2 horses. Badloo, holding the reins, rode away, appearing as if he were escorting a bride from her parental home. Meanwhile, Badloo rode away, richer by 3 horses, a carriage, and a goat with her kids. The landowner and his wife laughed uncontrollably at this spectacle. Later, when the landowner returned home, his wife excitedly narrated the incident, expecting him to be amused. But instead of laughing, he became furious. "You mean you handed over our goat and her kids to this man?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "We even decorated them and sent them off in a grand carriage." The landowner fumed. "You fool! He wasn't the idiot you were. He tricked all of you." Realizing the trickery, the landowner quickly prepared his horse and chased after Badloo. But Badloo, anticipating such a reaction, had already taken a detour into a dense forest. He hid the carriage and horses behind some bushes and sat on the ground, placing his cap beside him. When the landowner arrived, he saw Badloo and asked, "Hey, did you see a man with a 2-horse carriage?" Badloo replied, "Yes, sir. He had a goat and 3 kids with him, but he left a while ago." The landowner, desperate to catch him, said, "Come with me and help me find him." Badloo shook his head and said, "I can't, sir. My falcon is under this cap. If I leave, it might escape." The landowner, eager to capture Badloo, offered to watch over the cap while Badloo rode his horse to chase the thief. Badloo agreed, took the money, mounted the horse, and disappeared, leaving the landowner guarding an empty cap. After hours of waiting, the landowner finally lifted the cap, only to realize he had been tricked again. "That scoundrel fooled me, just like he fooled my wife," he cursed, spitting on the ground in frustration. Meanwhile, Badloo rode away, richer by 3 horses, a carriage, and a goat with her kids.